tapping in here, because technically it's disorderly. This committee room, very suitably, is used for European committee debates. And it won't surprise you to know that I've often been criticising some activity of the European Union and sitting in the second row along here and pointing behind the chairman to this wonderful painting of Alfred the Great fighting off the Danes and feeling that our relationship with Europe should be modelled on Alfred the Great fighting off these forces that wish to rule us. But I think the most interesting person here today actually is not me, but is going to be Alexander Adamescu, who has seen European Arrest Warrant's failures at first hand. So what I'm going to deal with is why I object to it in principle. What is wrong with having a European Arrest Warrant as such? Well, first of all, there's its basic assumption that all legal systems across the European Union are equal. They are not. Some are good, some have standards that are just as high as ours, some have standards that are in no way similar to ours. Some have standards that the European Union itself recognises are not as high as ours. When Croatia joined, the European Union, the Commission itself, said that the efforts to remove corruption in Croatian's police service and judiciary had not been fully successful. And so you have the power for a Croatian law enforcement person who may be part of a crooked system to issue an arrest warrant that means you, sir, can be arrested and taken to Croatia without any test in the UK of whether what you're being accused of is actually valid or whether the process that will be used against you is proper. So that is a fundamental objection. The starting point is wrong. The second point is that we have a different system of justice from most of the rest of the European Union. We have the common law and they have the civil code. Napoleonic code, Roman law, however you want to see it. We have two fundamental principles that they do not necessarily have. The first of these is, of course, the presumption of innocence. A very powerful presumption that it is the duty of the state to prove it against you, and you are able to defend yourself vigorously in an adversarial system. That is so important to protecting the innocent. But we have that, with that, habeas corpus, that you cannot be detained unless there is good reason to detain you, and after a certain period you must appear before a court. Now, that does not apply across the European Union. So you can be arrested and removed from this country and lose your rights to habeas corpus. There's no ability for a writ to be issued, a writ of habeas corpus to be issued in this country to get you out again, because you've gone, it's too late, you're not under our auspices. So that removal of protections, I think, is a very dangerous one. And then, of course, there is the issue of what may happen to you when you go to trial, that we have very strong protections within our system to ensure that the innocent aren't found guilty, and trial by jury is a very important part of that. That, again, is not replicated throughout the European Union. So, you could throw this all back at me and say, well, why aren't I against all extradition of any kind ever? Why don't I simply say that this mystic land is so glorious and special that it is inconceivable that any subject of Her Majesty could commit a crime and be taken off by a foreign country? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there should be proper protections in place to ensure that at least a similar standard is applied in the nation that you are going to, and that some basis of evidence has been shown to be held against you to legitimise the transfer that is taking place. It is very important that we cooperate with other nations in law enforcement. We have a system with the United States that I'm not entirely happy with, but which is better than the system we've got under the European Arrest Warrant. Actually, we want to go back to the systems we've always previously had, where a prima facie case needs to be made against you, and you can only be deported to a jurisdiction that has similar standards and not unreasonable punishments in relation to what you are accused of. Now, as we leave the European Union, we will effectively leave the European Arrest Warrant system, because we will be able to maintain our own protections that have currently been passed into law but are of dubious effectiveness. The reason I say they're of dubious effectiveness is that they are subject currently to the European Court of Justice. So the proportionality test that came in a couple of years ago hasn't been subject to an ECJ test. And you know all these stories about people being deported to Poland for stealing a wheelbarrow, all those sort of nonsense. Now, that has been prohibited under our law, but we don't know if that is acceptable to the ECJ. It hasn't been tested. And so, crucially, once we've left, we will be able to apply our own tests. And when we do that, we will be able to make a workable extradition system with our friends in the EU. But we must examine, whenever we do that, whether we think the systems of justice that we will be sending people back to are valid. And this is where what Alexander's going to have to say is of such importance, because such serious questions arise over how he has been treated. And those questions, currently, there is very little the UK government can do about it. And that is at the heart of my concern over the EAW. The EAW is against the principles of justice that we have had in this country for hundreds of years. And that's a longer and different talk about how our principles of justice have come about. But just one thing to bear in mind. One of the great coincidences of history. It's 1215, the year in which Magna Carta is signed and we get trial by jury. Coming from that, what happens, crucially, at that same year? The Lateran Council bans trial by ordeal. And once you take God out of trial by ordeal is replaced in the UK or in England by trial by jury, but on the continent essentially by confessions. And you get a completely different system of justice deriving from the coincidence of the banning of trial by ordeal in the same year as trial by your peers is put into Magna Carta. It is a very interesting and ancient history that we have got of a legal system that is very powerful to protect the innocent, and we should give up parts of that very, very cautiously. And we should examine what other nations do with the greatest care before we allow people to be deported on the say-so of a judge or of a policeman whose credentials we don't properly know.